Justin, look over here. Melinda, James, and Justin.
I want to go back down. I should have came on the hike. Look at these pictures. I should have stayed back with my mom. Nobody throw anything.
Don't run, James. Walk, Justin. Walk slowly.
I can see the white spot.
So you don't fall.
This is rock. Dad, is there any petrified wood up here?
Probably not up here.
No.
We can get petrified wood on our hike tomorrow. Petrified wood's up at the top over there.
And we're not going to go up.
We're trying to see if we can find dinosaur bones. I think I found
Do you have a wide angle lens, wood? It's fun. You guys can watch.
No, that will scare me.
Can I roll one?
When we're ready, I'll let you go.
No.
Because I got the perfect shot.
Which one?
Yeah.
Okay. One void's through.
This game.
Tell James Esplin to get up there.
Come
Come up here.
If I can.
Come up here.
I'm scared.
There comes Kendrick. Oh, you're doing good work. Found out here?
I was just trying to move out of the way of that.
you won't be able to take Eric, I don't think.
Well, Boyd got that backpack all fixed for the size. And I'm just too used to taking a 2-year-old pace. And that's an adult pace.
If we went up the bottom, and then
In some ways, I think that might be best.
would somebody go? Would somebody
As soon as we get
know if
to
you get anywhere over in that? If you miss it and get kind of around the head, that any place over there north of it.
the thing that happens is if you stick on the road, when you go through those gates, you know you're 100 feet too far. Turn around and come back. Wait for somebody to find him. You're within 100 yards of deer camp. Less than that, 50 yards.
You ought to need about 3 stumps, about 2 feet, about like that, to set the Dutch ovens on. Well, go get them. Get your saw and go find them.
You find a tree.
Well, didn't you see that pine tree down?
We could always go for that little cedar right up here that we hang the deer in before. We don't need it anymore. Yeah. I heard. Jamie, is that all you're gonna cook? What? Come get it.
You have a soap?
Soap? What can? This soap.
Say hi, Dad. Oh, say hi.
Michael, it's time to be getting ready for bed. Come on. Gotta scrub your knee. Come on, dog. Okay? Come on. Go. See the leaves. Boyd.
Where else might it have been?
Give me a
It's a family.
Who is that good looking guy right there?
I don't know.
Oh, there's some butter and bottle I put in the food. Oh, it's right there on the Robbie getting gray hair.
That's your arrow! That's your arrow!
And like to help out and stuff if you need it.
Yeah. David has some in the backpack.
I think maybe they put some on him already.
I don't know who did it.
How you doing?
Oh, what happened?
Oh, you know that? Good old drink of
Pop
water.
will make you thirsty.
Quenches your thirst very bad.
Well, just gets in your stomach and jiggles around.
Keep you cool while you're walking.
Oh, it's running out already.
Yeah.
The direction to go is right behind Grandpa.
Daddy, guess what?
What?
I got a kiss in there.
Wow.
Hey, this is where we got all the petrified
Eric!
Nope. Let's move on another pair.
petrified wood. Look at this.
Bring down that stop in a single line.
Well, back in 1906, I used to climb this hill. Did you get one? Let me follow.
You ready? You want to start now? Don't start yet. Good morning. This is a beautiful spring morning on the 10th day of June, and our family just hiked up through the head of Bobcreek, and most of the children and the women went around the road, and they're over on the Money Rock right now, and we're on top of the rock that's on top of the high ridge, the highest point on our land. We're right between the head of Bobcreek and the head of Earl's Canyon and the head of the Box Canyon. They all meet right here. We're just up on the ridge behind the Martin Corral.
Okay.
From on top of the ridge above Bobcreek, we're looking straight north at Strawberry Point. Now he's going to the west along the pink ledges Navajo Lake, Brine Head, Blowhart. The knoll you see straight ahead is the Black Knoll by the 4-H camp we used to go to in Iron County. Now he's around towards Bobcreek. He's going to turn down and show us where Bobcreek is. You can't actually see Bobcreek from here. The mountain just behind Bobcreek is called Table Mountain. It's the mountain that's between the Orderville Gulch and North Fork. Now as he goes left, clear over on the skyline is Kolob, Cedar Mountain. As he goes around, you can see Pine Valley Mountain now that is just up from St. George, and the very first part of Zion Park. The white ledges are Zion Park. And then as he drops down toward us from Zion Park, you can see the Money Rock. And all of the area from the Money Rock out that way is where we've always hunted deer for so many years. The one we call the Rock. You can see that over there now where we hunt deer. This is the kind of the back side of Jim Creek Point. Then as you go into the pine trees there, that's where our deer camp is.
Let's start over again.
Okay, now we're looking at our deer camp right in those pines. You can't actually see the camp, but it's in all the ponderosa pine there. Now you're going to go to the east again. As we go to the east, you can see the coral pink sand dunes out on the horizon there. Clear on the horizon is out over towards Grand Canyon. Buckskin Mountain is the farthest ones you can see. You can see the red knoll that's between Orderville and Kanab. Now you can see the first part of White Mountain that's kind of shaded over there in the morning like this. Now if you'll drop down, Boyd, as he goes down, the marking trail that we're going to go to next is right. Okay, this is what's left of our marking trail. We used to, about this time each year, we'd bring all the sheep into that marking trail and separate the lambs from the ewes and cut off their tails and castrate the bucks and mark their ears with Grandpa's mark. All of the sheepmen are all around the area would come and. We're zoomed in on Money Rock again, and again, as I said before, this is the area we like to hunt deer. Then as he goes to the left, he's going through the deer camp area, through the pine trees. And then, of course, to the left is the little short point that's down from the deer camp. We're looking southwest right now, over the Box Canyon. The Box Canyon is down just below us now. We're on top of the rock still. This is where Juanita and I wrote our names in 1957, the year we were married. Okay, we're on the ridge again at the head of Bobcreek. Boyd is looking northeast. He's moving around the skyline, looking along the ridge towards Fredrick Canyon, the head of Earls Canyon, head of Bobcreek. They all come together right about where we're looking now. Now he's over towards Strawberry Point. He's going across the pink ledges. Getting towards looking towards the head of North Fork and Navajo Lake, Brine Head, Blowhart.
There's Blowhart right there.
Black Knoll, it's coming towards the Black Knoll. On around Cedar Mountain. And down towards Kolob. Looking over the top of Table Mountain. We passed that now. Now he's getting toward Pine Valley Mountain, mountain above St. George. Now he's entering Zion Park, around by the perch and the rock, the hunting area. He's over the top of the deer camp, going towards the southwest. Zooming in on again on the Money Rock, and he's going to go looking along the ridge between head of Bobcreek and Box Canyon. This is Bobcreek Point now. There's another favorite hunting place and sightseeing place. Beautiful view of Zion Park from out on there, and we're going out there a little later on. Now it looks like he's aiming back towards Pine Valley again, Zion, over towards the deer camp again, down to southwest.
This is the marking corral where Grandpa Esplin used to mark the sheep. There's the old snags. There's the fence, one of the fences. Here's what's left of some of the corral. Three pine trees that mark the area, land points.
And zoom. Don't do very much panning. Zooming's a lot better than panning.
All over. Sort of Bobcreek where we're over there and over that way. Keep them together, that's you hurt it. That's right.
It's a big fat lizard.
How much do you want me to talk?
I'll give you 5 minutes worth. Here. This is one of the places where we get the most about the heritage part.
This wasn't the main thing. Then we went to where the camp was, man.
Okay, you ready? Of course. Okay, I'm standing in the old marking trail now. This is the fence where we'd hold the lambs up while my dad cut off their tails and castrated them and marked them. Our mark was an upper and lower bit on the left ear, an upper half on the right ear for the ewes, and the opposite with the wethers. The little pen here is where we'd bring 40 or 50 ewes and lambs into this pen. Then it was the job of us, we kids, to find the lambs within the ewes and drag them over here to where my dad, hold them while my dad would cut off their tails and castrate and mark them. Then he'd daub them. These old buckets are where we'd have sheep dip mixed with water with a stick with a rag on it. And after he got through with each one, he'd dab it in that and dab it on the tail of the lamb. We'd hold the lambs upside down with the 4 feet, their head toward us. Then he'd throw the tails in a pile right here. Then once we had all the lambs out of that pen, we'd let the ewes out this way, and then we'd go out and bring another bunch down. Okay, once we have all the ewes and lambs down into this little pen, we've separated all the lambs out and finished. Let all the ewes out. Then we go back and count the pile of tails, and as we count the tails to determine how many lambs we have. And then you can count the lambs again in the fall, and we know how many lambs we lost during the summer. At this point, then we of course leave the sheep alone while the mothers find their lambs again, and we go back up to our camp right up here, and usually had a Dutch oven dinner cooking, and we go up and have a good meal. Usually there's quite a few extra ranchers here because they come while we have the sheep in the corral so that they can get the that have gotten into our herd from their herd, they can separate them out and drive them back to their place at this time. Chop down, and what's left of the tree we chop down. Real good pitchy wood. What else do you want me to say about it? We worked on this tree for 2 years, chopping, and then we didn't see it fall. It fell during the winter when we weren't here. I'm standing at the site where we used to have our tent at the time we were camped at the marking trail. Picked up this old dried up piece of leather. Apparently this is a bell strap from one of the sheep. We camped here for probably about a month. We would drive in the pickup over to the area by our deer camp. We'd pack over to here with pack horses because there's no roads here. And we spent a lot of time here. Some of the first, that leather actually broke, it's so brittle now. We were camped here one of the first times that Daddy left Deloy and me with the sheep alone while he went someplace, and the sheep were up in the oaks up here. I remember we really were worried that we were losing them all. We didn't know where they were. But back over that way underneath the tree, I remember one time we'd dug a hole and put a gallon can in a hole, and then we'd catch all kinds of the little rodents and insects and lizards and anything that could get in a gallon can and couldn't get out. And right over here, I remember one time there must have been 8 or 10 other people here from other ranches here, and then I think Hans Sorensen came up from Sorensen's ranch to help us, and we had a Dutch oven dinner buried in the ground out there cooking. It used to always be fun for me when all these neighbors would come, because they'd always tell stories. Daddy and the other men would tell stories about experiences and things that happened to them a long time ago. Sometimes things that happened out on the Arizona Strip, and it was always really interesting, I thought. Uncle Lawrence and some of his, Larry, some of his older boys would nearly always be here, Dick, and Tim Hoyt, whose ranch is over to the east of us and north of us. He was from Hurricane. He's also Daddy's cousin. I used to just love to hear him tell stories. He'd come up most of the time, and it was just a lot of fun, a long time ago. 1946 would have been the last time that we camped here with my dad. We actually camped here. I lived here, stayed here for about 2 weeks. Just after my dad died, we were back to this campground. We marked the lambs in the same corral this one last time, and then about the 15th of June, about 5 days later than this, we took them down the Bobcreek trail and around Bobcreek and over on to the plains, what they call the plains, or towards Cedar City, and sold them to Clarence Lamrell and Cleo Wood.
Okay, what do you have there, Jalen?
This is the last old coal oil lantern we found from Dad's camp from when the year his dad died. They said they left a bunch of this stuff here, and this is the bottom, the top, and the handle to it that we found here sitting at the old campsite.
Okay.
We're right on the trail at the marking trail where it starts on its way back over to deer camp. I remember one time when we were here for the last time in the summer, we knew we wouldn't be back here till the next year. This tree had about a 10-inch diameter base, and we nailed a nail in the tree about our height, and we wanted to see how much the tree had grown by the next year, to see how much the key had raised, or the nail had raised during 1 year, to see how much it grew in a year. Of course, they don't grow that way, but we thought it did. We stopped again on the trail between the marking trail and deer camp. We stopped here because this is a place where we used to always set traps to catch coyotes. I was telling Jaylene that catching coyotes is really quite an important part of my childhood, because not only did we save the lambs by killing the coyotes, but we also used to sell the furs. I remember when I was in probably junior high school, I made 2 fur stretchers that we used to stretch the furs on. But this is a spot we're just up from the Box Canyon and on our way over to Marking Trail. And this particular spot used to be a real good place to catch coyotes. I remember real early in the spring coming up from clear down off the steep trail to deer camp, carrying traps up along the ridge by the rock where we were, to set traps up ahead of the sheep. Remember one time it was about this time of year, I guess, and we were going along the top of the ridge up there, and we could see a snowstorm coming. It actually snowed on us that day. And what else? Anyway, I remember catching at least 3 or 4 different coyotes right here. We stopped again on the trail between Marking Trail and Deer Camp. This is the site of the famous quarter story. When I was just a little boy, I was out after the herd with my dad alone. I had 2 quarters, and quarters really meant a lot to me then. I mean, I hardly ever had any. And I was playing right along here one day while I was waiting. Daddy was out with the sheep, and I was playing right here. And I'd make little piles of dirt and put the quarters in the piles of dirt, and then I'd dig them out. And all of a sudden I dug out this one little pile of dirt and I couldn't find the quarter. I just sifted all through it. Anyway, I lost one of my 2 quarters. I couldn't find it, and for years after I had my own family, as we walked by here hunting deer, I'd tell the kids about, and my brothers and sisters, I'd say, this is the place where I lost my quarter. And I told this story for years and years, and then one day, about what year, Jalen, do you think? 1975, which would probably have been at least 30 years later. We were walking along here, and Jalen was with me, and my brother Deloy, and Boyd, and Tina, a whole bunch of us. We were up here at deer season time, and we were walking down along here, and I once again I said, this is where I lost my quarter. My brother Deloy looked down and says, and there it is. And he reached down and picked it up. And it stayed right on top of this little high place for 30 years. And I still have the quarter. The top half of it's kind of corroded, and one half looked kind of shiny, like it'd been half buried for a long time.
What else do you find in this area, Dad?
Also, up this draw here, we're looking towards the pass by the rock on the ridge, and up this draw, our own children and different ones in the family have found lots of nice arrowheads. It's been a real good place for arrowheads. Also, back towards deer camp, one time I found a little red arrowhead about 3/4 inch long, just as sharp as a pin, a perfect arrowhead. We thought it must be what the Indians used to hunt birds with. Behind Boyd, do you want to turn? Okay, now behind me here, I was telling the kids here that underneath this tree is one of the places where there's a seep, and all over this mountain back when I was young, there's little wet places, and we dig holes to water the sheep. And this little seep here would hold water almost all summer long. It's one of the places where the trail went right by the seep, and there'd be a little clear pond of water there. And there was many of them back on all these points. There'd be a little place where we dig a little seep hole and to water sheep. And also, my dad would carry salt in 50-pound bags out all over the range to salt the sheep.
Would he carry it by hand, just over his shoulder?
Over his shoulder, We're still on the trail between Marking Trail and Deer Camp. I want to tell you about a little incident that happened right here. We were camped here, probably I was 12 years old and my brother Deloy was 10 years old. And Daddy told us what to do with the sheep. They were in this area here. He went into Orderville, stayed 2 days to put up the hay, and he left us here to watch the sheep, and he told us exactly what to do. And on the day that he came back, he brought our little brother Jerry with him. Our tent was right here, and Jerry was probably climbing one of those trees right there that sloped down there. And as he slid down the tree, a knot in the tree ripped a big gash in his leg about 3/4 inch deep and about 5 inches long. And Daddy took him, put him in the pickup, and told us, you stay here and watch the sheep, and he took off. And we had no idea what to do with them or where they're supposed to go because they hadn't given us any more instructions. He took Jerry in. Well, I think I was probably about no older than 12. It could have been younger than that, and Deloy was probably about 10. He went to Canab to take him to the doctor. There's no doctor there, so he had to turn around and go to Panguitch and to finally find a doctor, have him sewed up and taken care of. He didn't come back till the next day again. I remember we were, of course, young and kind of afraid and didn't know what to do with the sheep, and it turned out to be quite an experience for us.
Chris, don't put your sucker down.
No place will be the same. And it wasn't bad if your feet were in the water.
Was it Jalen that
Lost
left his camera and went back?
It was there?
That's really is a nice
Dad, look at the little hummingbird.
that's a nice place.
Right there is where we hung our deer. Right up in this tree, along this branch right there. Even the support post is right there, still there. Right here in front is the cross post, hitching post where you tap the horses. And there's the camp spot where we camped. The big old pine trees from deer camp. We used to shoot our rifles, deer hunt, right across where this fence is now built, right up. We'd shoot right up into where this area right up there, where that anthill is. We'll be back here. Another view of where we used to hang the deer. There's a game, Gabriel or Gamble, or whatever they're called. We used to hang a deer right there. Right on that branch there under this tree. I used to like to lay here, look up underneath the ponderosa pines up at the sky, and the wind would blow and they would move and wave and make hushy noise like it is right now. There we used to build little corrals out of pine cones and sticks and stuff. Plantations, it was a lot of fun. That's the road going out, camp right there. Big, tall ponderosa pine tree.
This is another campsite we used to have with our sheep hunting up here. We're right at the head of Newts, and I was telling the kids about the little pile of rocks right over there. Do you want to show them the rocks, Boyd? At quite a few of these campsites, you'll see a little pile of rocks like that. We used to come up to Dave's Meadow, and there's a sandy, steep hill, and the pickup wouldn't go up unless it had a weight in the back. So Daddy would load the pickup with the rocks, and when he got up here, we'd unload the rocks. So almost each one of our campsites here, you'll see a little pile of rocks where they accumulated. Also, just over here where all the other kids are is where I found my little tiny perfect arrowhead that I told you about. It's in this flat right over here.
Grandpa down on the rock. I pan around. Cedar Mountain there. Brian Head, whatever. Cedar Breaks. Around to Strawberry Point. Around the rock we came from earlier. Over Orderville.
Okay, now we're on the rock, the deer hunting rock. It's at the head of the South Fork of Jimmy Creek, between Jimmy Creek and Newts. Boyd is pointing the camera towards what we call a perch. We used to have a perch up in the top of 3 or 4 oak trees. Real good place to see the deer. This is the area that we've probably, during the time we've hunted deer over the years and years, we've killed more deer than anywhere else.
Right there where the camera is now is where I shot my first deer. Okay.
Okay, now as we go, he's going around. Again, you're looking down the South Fork of Jimmy Creek now towards the Orderville Gulch. Now as he comes around it, now he's looking, stop right there, boy. This is Jimmy Creek Point. This is the point, and between here and Jimmy Creek Point and around this area, around towards the pond on the north, is probably where we've had the best luck hunting of any place else. We got so we could really hunt Jimmy Creek Point and get deer. It's just been really a good place to hunt. We really enjoyed it. Now as you go on to the right, Boyd, past the trees, look at this. Okay, we're back where we ended on the last tape. He's showing the grove of trees that's on the back side of Jimmy Creek Point. That's the trail we used to walk around, goes around through those and into the pond at the Jimmy Creek buck pasture. Boyd has the camera back on the area where we built our perch. The reason we built that perch, one year a long time ago in deer season time, there was snow on the ground and there were really a lot of bucks up here. And DeRay was on the rock where we are now, and I was over on that side hill where the camera's showing now. And just trails of bucks would come up from these pines and go around and out that side over there where he's showing now. And I couldn't see him because there's so many oak trees in front of me. So we decided to build a perch up on top of the trees. So we built a little nest up on the tops of a bunch of oak trees, called it the perch, and that's where I spent the opening deer season, morning of deer season for years, on top of there.
That's where I shot my first deer in case I didn't hear.
Oh, and Boyd shot his first deer from up on there. It was down in a little draw to the west there.
Go ahead.
Okay, Boyd now has the camera aimed at the top of Steep Trail. This trail drops off into our homestead. That's the place. It's down that steep trail where they dragged the lumber from the sawmill over here in Newts that went down to build their homestead cabin when Daddy was homesteading down there. It's a steep trail that goes down off the ledges, and they used horses and dragged the lumber down from there down to the cabin site.
Okay, James.
Okay, now we're looking to the southeast toward White Mountain. I've always thought this is a real pretty view. The sun isn't quite behind us far enough to show it really good. In the evening it really shows up pretty, I think. I don't know where he's moved a little bit, but the red knoll on the sand is to the right side there. We're kind of looking down Newts towards Dave's and Benny's ranches. Now we're looking to the northeast. The pink ledges you see up there are the ledges that are back behind Alton. Up on top of those and not back very far is Bryce Canyon, of course. Down in the ridge, 2 ridges over from us right now, or 2 points over from us, that's the Markenkrell Ridge where we were earlier. Underneath some of those pines, one of those big pine trees out along there is where my dad, he had 2 horses out here, Old Brownie and Sway. And Sway was just a really wild horse, a thoroughbred, a sorrel. That was, I guess he was probably the only person that could ride him. And he was out here one time, they were turned loose, and Sway was so wild he couldn't catch him, and he needed the horses to pack his camp, and he just couldn't catch him. And I guess he had so much trouble with old Sway anyway that he ended up shooting old Sway underneath the pine tree just out on the point from the out of the way from the marking trail, so he could catch Brownie to pack his camp out. And the bones of old Sway are underneath the pine tree out there. We see them every time we go out hunting out on the marking trail point. I go by that place where old Sway's bones are.
Deer camp's right down in there. We're looking from the west and south.
You know,
There's the road that comes down out of
if we could keep the quality of this.
that goes down to the pond down to the head of Jimmy Creek. Down through there. We go up over, back over the pine trees where that deer that Jalen shot and didn't find, and that's where the guys are waiting for us right now.
Stay on it just a little while.
Whoa.
If we can talk while things like that are showing and have voice on it.
This is a little arrowhead we just found down just up from the pond and back off the back side, the east side of where the rock is. We went down because I found a couple pieces of pottery there before, and so we went back downtown just to see if we could find one, and I found this sitting in the middle of a sagebrush. A whole bunch of little chips where it looks like they'd been making arrowheads, and then this is the little arrowhead that I found.
Good.
How far can you zoom, Boyd?
Okay.
Say something.
It's pretty.
That's still behind the tree.
Uh-huh.
Pretty good boy, too. He started baby shit. Yeah.
This is the entrance to deer camp. We turn off the main road on for a little short road. Old logs. And this is the other road that goes on around to Lawrence's, and here comes James.
Okay, we're right on top of the Clear Creek Mountain right now, where the road goes through the pine trees between the deer camp and Bobcreek Point. I was thinking back, 1947, the 1st of May, 1947, when we brought our sheep up over here. We left down at the Y with the sheep, and when we got up about to almost to Sorensen's ranch, it got so rainy we had to wait down there for 2 or 3 days while it just rained and rained and rained. I mean, it's really muddy. And then later, finally, we were able to come on up over here. My dad had a bad cold. In fact, he had pneumonia. And we brought sheep up over here when it finally quit raining enough. As we brought the sheep up over here, we spent the night. We had the 2 horses, old Betty and Skip, and my dad and I spent the night here underneath these pine trees right here. And I remember we had supper here underneath this tree right over here. And we just had one bedroll, and my dad and I slept together in the same bed underneath that tree right there. This is probably about a week before he died. I remember the next day after we spent the night here, when Daddy was taking the sheep and I had the two horses and had a saddle on one horse and a pack on the other, starting down the Bobcreek trail. And it was so muddy, and you know how it's so clay, right, at the top of the Bobcreek trail. I remember those horses just sliding on their haunches for 50 or 100 feet. I thought sure I was going to have one of them over a ledge or falling down or something, but we went all the way down, just really muddy and rocky, and it was quite an experience for me. I hadn't done that before, and I was really afraid I was going to hurt the horses. At that time I was 14 years old. This big old ponderosa pine tree, I always thought it was such a big tree. We used to walk by this all the time. The road and the trail goes by it. I was always impressed with how big it was. We're in the ponderosa pine grove right on top of the mountain right now. This is Howdy Spencer's corral. It was on a homestead that my dad bought from him. It's kind of interesting there. My dad bought homesteads from 4 different individuals, and each one of the homesteads had a corral on, and the corrals would hold sheep, and at different times we either marked or second marking or each of the corrals. And the first corral we saw in the tapes was Earl Sorensen's corral. That's the one we call the marking corral. Then we bought one homestead from him, my dad did, and then there was another homestead that he got from Joe Jorgensen. It's way over to the east of us, and there's a corral on it, a stockade corral, then this corral, and then down at Bobcreek, Tink Spencer, Alvin Spencer, had that homestead, and my dad bought Bobcreek from Tink Spencer. Between the four of those homesteads, he had about 2,200 acres of private land and a lot of BLM land that went with it. Boyd changed positions now. I'm still in the same place, but he's taking the picture to the south now, the pine trees that were just by this corral of Howdy Spencer's. We're right on just starting out on Bobcreek Point. Now, we stopped here because I was thinking about a time, one of my earliest memories of being up in this country. We were in probably our old International pickup, and we drove up to about right here on this road. We got out, and my mom and dad were in the car. My mother had us walk right up on top of this little ridge right here, the point. We're on Bobcreek Point now. And she says, well, look everybody, we're on top. Remember, she said, this is on top. That's what they used to always call all this country we've been on today. We used to call it on top. And it's actually on top of Clear Creek Mountain. But we had sheep would run down off in the Orderville Gulch this way and down off in the canyons that way. But this area up here, we just called it up on top. And the whole area we called up in the Oaks. But this is what we call up on top.
But it's got a casting.
This is up on top. They're walking along Bobcreek Point. Towards Zion's. The head of Jimmy Creek and up on the rock. Looking up on the rock where we were earlier.
We're out on Bobcreek Point now, partway out on Bobcreek Point. This is another of our campsites. As we walk by here through the years, our kids have always been interested in seeing the stumps and the wood where my dad cut wood here. He would cut wood during the summertime, cut enough wood to heat our house all year. And each time we'd go in, we'd take a take a load of wood into Waterville. We had a wood stove, and that's how we cooked our meals and kept warm. And each time we went in, we'd take a load of cut up oak wood that he'd cut with an axe.
What are those rocks?
These are the same rocks again that we'd haul out, put in the back of the pickup to make it up the hill down there in by Dave's Meadow, where it was sandy and steep and the empty pickup couldn't make it up the hill. Coyotes, young coyotes.
Heading down Bobcreek Trail right here.
Okay, this is where, telling you about when the horses slid down the Bobcreek Trail so bad, when it was so muddy. They just skidded from here right down through those trees right down the trail. It was just wet and slick. I thought sure one of them was going to get hurt.
I remember right here is that time that our family climbed up. We've been camping. One that spent a week down the Bobcreek, our whole family. When we used to have to pack in.
Heading down the Bobcreek Trail.
Zigzag back down to here.
All right.
I thought it was Lynn.
David.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Dang it.
Now we've stopped halfway down Bobcreek Trail. We're at Tink's Throne. Had to take our little interlude here. This is right, the horse trail that used to go by here went right about where I'm sitting by the rock between the trees, and everyone called that Tink's Throne because of Tink Spencer, Alvin Spencer. He's the man that we bought Bobcreek from. He homesteaded it. We're also right on the Bobcreek Trail, the sheep trail. Just, I guess, hundreds and hundreds of herds of sheep used to trail through here as they were going from either the desert or the south up onto the mountain and up into North Fork and all of the areas north and northeast of here.
I guess so. Why don't we play soccer if we're gonna have everyone play? Cause you can't play with a frisbee with a lot of people really. Let's play ultimate. Turn up, Grant, and I'll pass it to you. That way.
Come on, make it, go!
Did it go in? No. Oh. Let's try, Grant.
Get away, get away.
It's June the 10th, right?
Good.
June the 10th. You're all on the video. All the noises you're making are being recorded now. It's June 10th and we're out to Bobcreek. All of the Lynn Esplin family. We're all here. How many, Grandma?
29 of us.
29 of us. We're out here for our last campground at Bobcreek. This morning we took a hike up Bobcreek and up on top and over the Marking Trail and over the rock, and everywhere. And now we're going to talk around the fire a little while. And people have got that. If you want me to talk, you have to ask me questions. So, what should we talk about?
Why don't you tell us about just the story that came to mind about what they'd say about Grandpa Esplin and how good a shape he was in, and about the cougar story and stuff.
Okay. While we were hiking this morning, we were talking as we were walking along. I was telling him that Daddy always carried salt out to the sheep. Most sheep men feed their sheep salt at the water, and they just put the salt there and they come in and eat salt and then they go out. My dad always carried the salt out on all the ridges and the points, and he had about 100 salt boxes scattered out all over the whole range. And he'd carry the salt in 50-pound. The salt comes in 50-pound bags, and he would, but they have, you know, it's like burlap, not burlap. Yeah, that's burlap, isn't it? Burlap sacks, and the salt would sit through that. So he had these good, what they call seamless sacks back then, and he'd take the salt out of the burlap bag and dump it into a seamless sack. It was a larger sack, tie a knot in it, and throw it over his shoulders, and then he'd carry it out to all of the
Why would he
places.
have it away from the water?
Well, because that's where the sheep were most of the time, and it was more accessible. And another thing it does, it tends to pull the sheep out away from water and out onto the ridges and places where you want them to be. My dad was always known as being really, physically, he was a really good athlete when he was young, and he was strong. And I remember one time we had a cougar get in the sheep, and Jack Butler was had the hounds, and he'd always go out and catch cougars for people when they needed it. And he also took city dudes, we call them dudes, out with him to hunt cougars. And he had a ranch down here, what is now the North Fork Ranch, is that what it was? Clear Creek Ranch. And we got him to come out and hunt this cougar this one time. It was in her sheep, and they got up early one morning. I didn't go with them. I guess I still quite young then. And Jack Butler and all his dudes were on the horses, and my dad was walking, and they started up towards actually it was up in the area off the end of Geographic Point, and up in the upper end of the homestead. And the hounds got the scent of the cougar, and of course they always just take off really fast when they do that. And my dad, who was on foot, took off following the dog, and left all of the people on their horses way back behind, of course partly because of the brush. But the hounds caught up with the cougar and got up one on that rough side hill off the Jim Creek Point. It went up one little tree. Then his daddy came up closer to it. It jumped out of the tree and took off again, and was running up the rocky side. It's like running up towards these ledges across here. And my dad shot it as it ran up the hill. Anyway, Jack Butler and those guys were saying how they were commenting on how they couldn't keep up with Daddy when he was they were on horses. Yeah.
My dad always said he was a physical giant. He could outwalk anything.
When he was in high school, he ran the 220 yards was the race he liked to run, and he also threw the shot put. Okay, when the last tape ended, I started talking about my dad and his athletics when he was young. He used to run the 220 was his favorite race, I think, and I think he was pretty good. And he also threw the shot put. When he was, I guess about in the 11th grade, I don't know, but he was going to school down at Dixie. And it's when Dixie High School and Dixie College was combined. So I don't know whether they call it high school or college, but he was on the basketball team down there, and they won the Utah championship somewhere out on. They actually went clear back, and I think they won the national championship. But when they went back to play their national games, my dad didn't go with them. And the night before Daddy died, when we were camped over at the homestead, and Mom and Dad and me sit up in the tent. So the other little kids were in the other tent asleep, but we sat there and talked for quite a while. And I remember that's one thing we talked about was when was on that basketball team. He was saying then, he says, he actually quit the team after they'd won the state or something, because his best friend, who was also on the team, got kicked off for some reason. I can't remember what it was, and so he quit too. He says, but I was really glad I did, because he says when they won that championship, when they came back, he said the team members had to give speeches and everything. He says, I could never have done that. But he said, he remember saying he was glad that he didn't go with them. But so he was a real good basketball player and runner, and real quiet. Willard Meeks, son Meeks, who was a good friend of my dad's. I guess he was about Daddy's age, and his dad was kind of one of the prominent people in Orville, wasn't he? Willard's dad, Alfred Meeks. Anyway, my dad was herding sheep, I guess, for his brother Israel. And would Israel and Alfred kind of be, they might kind of been, what would you call them? Contemporaries or something. Anyway, my dad was working for his older brother, and he was herding sheep out on the desert, out on the strip, and Alfred was having so much trouble with Willard. I guess he was kind of a wild boy, so he sent him out to the herd to get him out of town, I guess, and to help him along. And anyway, so he was out with my dad. And I guess that's where they really got to be friends. Anyway, they were really good friends. And they were, Willow Creek, the one that we had to put the road across, they were up at the head of that herding. And Willard told us this story when he came for Daddy's funeral, but he said that there's I guess quite a big wether, and you know, wether is usually larger than the other sheep and stronger. And I guess Daddy bet Willard that he could outrun that wether down Willow Creek, running. And I guess he did, apparently, according to what Willard said. Got it separated out and took after it, and I guess caught up to it. We had Willard come and talk to us at my brother and sister's family reunion at Farmington, Kaysville, 1984. He died, I think, about the next year. But when I was up to BYU Invitational Track Meet, I guess it's when I was a junior in high school. I don't know, or a senior, maybe senior. No, I was a sophomore in high school. Anyway, Willard came. He lived up to Provo somewhere, and he came to the track meet. That was about the year after Daddy died, so we'd seen him just the year before. Anyway, he came over to the BYU and watched me run a couple of races, and then I went home with him that night, and he took me out to a movie, and I had supper with him, and it's kind of nice.
Did you ask why he was doing it?
Doing what?
To get an outfit, all that stuff. Were you too young to?
Let's talk a few minutes about some of our sheep camps, the camps we stayed at. What's the matter?
I'm just smiling at the models on the TV.
Oh, I thought we said something wrong. Now you ruined the picture. Anyway, one of the places we camped was right down here in the Oaks, and we had a big box, about a 4x4x8 box. We just call it the box. The box is there because we keep salt in it, so the porcupines couldn't get to them. And anytime we camped here, we always had to come in with pack horses. Brought the camps by pack. We'd kick on an open fire just like this. We used a Dutch oven.
The one we've used last night.
Yeah, we had using the very Dutch oven we're using here still, and that's how we got to our camps here, and also the marking trail. There's no road to the marking trail, so we packed there. My dad was really good with horses. He loved horses. He had a lot of good horses through his life. He was good at packing horses. One way you can tell who's a good pack horse man. The people that aren't so good use what they call a squaw hitch on the pack, because it's easy to put on but doesn't hold the pack as well. My dad always used what they call the diamond hitch. It's called a diamond hitch because on top of the pack there's the ropes made of diamond, and that's one he always used. So when we camped here, when we camped the marking trail, another place I remember camping for quite a while that we packed to was over at Joe Jorgensen's corral over on up from Earl's Canyon.
Tell them Joe Jorgensen's their grandfather.
George Jorgensen is also your grandfather. He's Juanita's grandfather, and he homesteaded one of the homesteads that my dad bought. Most of the land out here, my dad purchased from about the time I was born till I was 2 years old. Around 1932, 34 was when he bought those homesteads. And see, it was just 47, just 15 years later that he died, and all of the land was paid for when he died. He didn't have any debts anywhere at the time that he died. Question? Okay, Jody asked me when they used to pack, how many animals in a string. Usually we had just one or two because it was a small camp, but I remember earlier than that, before we even had a vehicle, I remember my dad packing up the horses at Orderville and going out to the herd. And he would usually be riding one and having either 3 or 4 behind. The 3 or 4 pack horses, and the horses, one horse would be tied to the tail of the horse in front of it. That's how they did it. And he would leave Orderville with his pack and 3 or 4 horses, and come up up onto here, up on someplace back on here, and bring everything he had, his camp and everything he'd need. And let's see, what else were we going to talk about? Oh, the 4 homesteads that my dad bought. One was this one here, which is Alvin Spencer, and Hattie Spencer, which is up on top of Bobcreek Point. Then Earl Sorensen homestead, which was the Marken Trail area, and then Joe Jorgensen, which was Fredrick's Canyon and over there. And I don't know what he paid for all of it, but that I do know, he paid $2.50 an acre for it.
For a total
2,200 acres of private land. And then he had BLM, over in Newts was BLM, and then a little bit up on top, here's BLM, and then everything down here is BLM. My dad also homesteaded himself, but he was younger than most of these others, and he was kind of the very tail end of the homesteading when they was giving out, when the homesteading act was going, and he didn't ever get his. It reverted and was BLM, so it was part of our BLM allotment for this area.
That's where the homestead camp is?
That's where the homestead camp is. My mother, when my mother and dad were married, my mother had a horse, from out to Maugason, and they were packing the horses, like I was telling you, with the 3 or 4 in the string. And I don't even know where it is, but somewhere they rolled some horses that they were packing, and the horse that my mother had was killed in that accident when their horses rolled down a mountain somewhere.
Kind of be like wrecking a car, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Sounds like rolling the car.
Yeah, it was.
Well, a horse rolled over backwards with you one time too, didn't it?
Yeah, it did.
Was it your first horse? That one?
No, it wasn't my horse. It was one that when I was working for Rollin, he bought a new horse. He didn't know anything about it and wanted me to just try it out, and so it was just really a funny horse. A big, tall horse, and if he'd start going someplace, and if he didn't want to go, he'd back up. And I didn't really realize this time I was going kind of around a little ledge, like a 2-foot ledge and a steep hill below. And I wanted to go up the bottom of the ravine, and I went around like that and started up through the brush, up like that. And he decided he didn't want to go, so he did what he does all the time. He just backed up, and when he backed up, he backed off of that little ledge. It was about 2 or 3 feet high. So when he did, he went right up over backwards. And as he went over backwards, he threw me off ahead of him down the hill. And so I lit down below him, and he lit on his back, with his head down the hill, right in the bottom of that little gully, with his head down the hill, and his feet in the air, and that's where he stopped. And he couldn't move, he couldn't get up. And I had to uncinch him. When I uncinched him, the horn was poked into the ground, and when I uncinched him, he slid off the saddle and down and was able to get up.
You break the saddle?
It didn't. It scarred it up a little bit, didn't break it. And I thought, and I was out the herd. I was herding a herd of sheep all by myself. This is when I was probably about 18 or 19, I don't know. But I've thought a lot of times, what if I'd still been underneath that saddle? I might still be there now, you know. Anyway, so a little later on, I decided I'm going to break him of that. So I'd get him in that same kind of a place. After he fell like that one time, he was pretty careful. But I started him up through a place, and I was watching. And I started him up, and so he started doing the same thing again. And I was ready, and so I pulled back on the reins and hopped off. And when he felt himself going down, well, he was just clawing for. He thought he was going to go backwards again, and he was really clawing, trying to get back up the hill again. But I wasn't on him this time. I was standing to the side.
Tell us about some of your other horses while you're talking about horses.
Okay, my favorite horse, of course. Well, my first horse was Old Brownie. That's when I was just a little kid. Old Brownie was a Mustang that I don't know sure who caught him, but my dad had him. He was caught out at Clay Hole, out on the Arizona Strip. He was 7 years old when he was caught. He was a stallion then, and we had him along with 2 or 3 other horses, and they were just. By the time I was could ride by myself, I was just a little bit. Old Chief had been hit by a car and broke his legs. We had to shoot him, and then Old Sway was the one that Daddy shot up here on by the marking trail because he couldn't catch him, and he needed a horse to pack his camp out, and so Old Sway was so wild he'd run, and Old Brownie would follow him, so he shot Sway and left him there and got Brownie and got out. But so all we had was Old Brownie by the time I was old enough to ride, and I think I was probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 or whatever old. But I went up to the corral up to there in Orderville and caught him, and I didn't even have a rope. I had kind of almost like a string, and I tied him up. Finally got him caught, and I tied him up to a rope. Okay, we were talking about Old Brownie first time I caught him. Anyway, I finally got a bridle on him and rode him up and down the road between the house and the corral, and so I'd gallop him as I left the house and went up towards the corral, and I thought it was pretty good. And so when my mother came up to milk the cows, I was showing them, and I think some of the young brothers and sisters, and that I could ride him, and galloped him up again, and he went kind of off. I can just see right where he went in my mind. Went off to the side a little bit, and there was a barrel, I think, there. And when he saw that, he jumped sideways and threw me off. And that was the first time he threw me off, first of about 100 times, I guess, that he threw me off. And that's some real interesting times. But he was really spooky, and if ever any wire, if he heard a wire, touched a wire, or a rope, or anything dragged, or anything moved, he would jump. And I just fell off him. He'd throw me off. And I always rode bareback, but I really enjoyed that horse. A lot of my friends, and all my friends are all older than me. They're Hugh Sorensen and Wendell Hoyt and Jay Heaton and people like that. They all had horses. And we'd all get our horses and we'd ride out, sometimes up on Cedar Flat, but most often we'd go out in the cove and ride our horses. And we would just run those horses all over the place. We'd play. I remember up on Cedar Flat one time playing Indians. We were divided into two sides, and we'd have battles on our horses. Yeah, and we'd run around up there on that sand flat on the horses.
And how old were you?
Well, old Brownie died when I was about 10 or 11, so I guess that again.
Pretty little.
12. I may have been 12 when he died. I don't know.
Hey, Dad,
little.
Tell us about when you got old Fredrick.
Old Fredrick? Well, there isn't much to tell about old Fredrick. We were hunting. Jerry, my brother Jerry, and I were hunting with Uncle Lawrence's boys, Larry and Dick and Mac, and we were camped over there, you know, what they call a Hardy Bowman Flat. It's where their cabin is. And we'd been hunting with them all day, and they had some horses. We didn't have any horses. This was during the time, it was after old Brownie had...
Skip.
Oh, let's see, we had Skip then, didn't we? Where's Skip?
Skip died then.
Yeah, because I was little.
Oh yeah, that was after Skip even, yeah. So we didn't have any horses, but they had some horses. And the first day of deer season, we kind of was tired of following them around. And Jerry and I came back along the top of the ridge around the head of Fredrick's Canyon the night before. And as I looked down, I thought, well, I'm going to come over and hunt here in the morning. And I even picked a rock partway down the side hill, and I decided I was going to go sit on that rock. So the next morning, Jerry and I climbed up onto the ridge and started down there. We were right on the ridge between Pine and Fredrick's Canyon, and Jerry, we saw a little buck down in the head of Pine, and Jerry shot it. And he went down in to get it, and I wanted to hurry and get on down onto the rock, you know, because it's getting about sun up, and I wanted to get down on my rock. And so he went down to get it, and I went on down and got on the rock that I'd planned the night before. And I'd been sitting there about 5 or 10 minutes maybe, and I heard this noise, and it was like somebody riding a horse through the oak leaves. And I thought it was just below me, just below the rock. And went just kind of, it's like a horse's feet. And I looked, I never could see it, and finally I realized what it was. Clear across Fredrick's Canyon, on the other side, right at the top, just great huge buck coming right straight toward me, and he was just jumping down over the small oak, and what I thought was a horse's feet was him jumping each jump, and he was coming right straight toward me. He'd really been spooked over in Earl's Canyon, and just came right up over the ridge, and of course I could see how big he was, and my heart started pounding, and I was getting nervous, and I squatted down and tried to get my place where I could get a good rest and for the gun, and the farther he came, he just kept going down slower and slower, and finally he got almost to the bottom, and by then he'd got down to a walk, and he turned and started going out that way, away from me, around the the bench, you know, more towards the mouth of Fredrick's Canyon. And just about 10 feet ahead of him was trees and things. He was just about into trees. So I took a shot at him. I must have hit just in the head of him. He stopped and turned around and stopped, looking back up the hill where he'd come from. So I was quite a bit above him, and he was faced away from me up the hill. And I shot again. This is Daddy's old 30-30 Savage saddle rifle. Yeah, the one Jalen's got now. And I shot again, and I got him about right in the shoulder, right behind the shoulder, shooting down on him, right through the spinal cord, right behind his shoulder, and he just dropped. He didn't take one step anywhere. And that's old Fredrick.
You had people coming wanting to buy him?
Yeah, he has 28 total points, 42 1/4 inch spread.
It's a buck.
And we got
That's a deer.
16 pints of meat from his neck.
Yeah, we bottled the neck and filled 15 pints from the meat on his neck. And that was the year that Carla was a baby. They have a picture of Carla sitting by the head on Grandma's front lawn. Okay, now what? They were asking me about my first pair of track shoes. When I think I was probably in the 8th grade or maybe in the 7th grade, and I liked track, and I wanted to get a pair of track shoes, and we didn't have very much money, and I talked to my mother, and she says, well, she didn't know whether we could afford it or not. And anyway, my dad came home from the herd, and I don't know that I even saw him. Maybe I was gone when he came. Anyway, he just stayed overnight and got real early the next morning, went back, and then that morning at breakfast, my mother told me that I could get the track shoes. She talked to Daddy about it, and he wanted me to have the track shoes. And that's the first that I knew that he had run in track when he was young. And but you know, from then on he was really interested in what I did in track. And in fact, at the time he died, we'd talked about he was going to help me a lot in track and help me do things. Even in basketball, we decided to make a basketball bank and help, you know, and we were going to have it so we could take it with us to different camps and things. Several things we were going to do starting that summer, and then he died, of course, in May before we got to do those things. I remember that's one thing that made me feel really sad at the time, because I was thinking, we were going to do all those things, and it was just kind of hard for me to accept the fact that he wasn't going to be, he wasn't going to be around. He did watch me run in one track meet. I don't know whether I was in the 7th or the 8th grade. It could have even been the 9th grade, but I'm not sure. But anyway, the Hurricane Invitational track meet, he was on his way out to the herd out on the desert, and he knew I was going to be at the track meet, and he stopped and watched me run, and I didn't even know he was there. I didn't know, he watched me run, but he at least I don't remember of seeing him there. But anyway, he watched me run that one time.
Did you win?
I don't remember that. I possibly did. At that time they had like a, I think it almost seems like they had a 7th and 8th was separate, and then the 9th, and then the high school. I was running either in the junior high or else the 8th grade one, I think. I remember there was Las Vegas High School was there, and I remember there was a colored boy running that won a lot of races that day, and I remember talking to my dad later, and he was talking about that colored boy. We were talking about him and his running, I remember.
Now, Jody asked about the clay horses and maybe some of the things you told us up on a deer camp.
Okay. My dad really, when he was young, they made clay horses all the time, and mud horses, we call them mud horses. And he could really make them good. In fact, he used to make them and sell them. I guess sell them to the other kids. I remember him telling that his mother didn't like him to sell them because she didn't think that was right for him to be selling mud horses for some reason. But occasionally we'd get him to make us some, and we could make clay horses, and we did it a lot, but they didn't look like his. His were so much better than anything we could make. And he made us some great huge ones. They were about probably 10 inches long or something, a lot bigger than normal. And they're asking me this morning up on top. I think we had the horses there, but at least we'd been making little corrals right in the road up on top, and out from the camp a little ways. And it was time to go home. We'd go home about once a week, and we thought he'd probably run over the corrals with the car, with the pickup when he left. And of course, I guess we didn't even really know that. I didn't know that he knew they were even there, but he probably did. He'd probably walked by them. But anyways, we left. He turned off the road and went out around them and didn't run over them. I remember I was quite relieved that we didn't run over our corrals. Anything else?
Started now.
Okay, they were asking me about some of the times when I used to ride the horse at different places, and I thought of 3 different instances. One was before we had Skip. It was after old Brownie died and before we got Skip. I was a scout. I guess I was about 12 years old, and we'd gone into town, and I didn't come out with Daddy because there was I don't think I even knew that they were going to have a scout camp. They were going to have a scout camp up on Cedar Mountain, and my sleeping bag was out to the herd, and we were camped right to the top of the Bobcreek trail, just barely right at the top, right, almost starting down in, and Daddy was out there alone. And I needed my sleeping bag to take on the scout camp. So I went down to Webb Adair's and borrowed his horse in Orderville, and I rode the horse out to camp right here at the top of the Bobcreek Trail, and got there when Daddy was there at noon, and got my sleeping bag and had lunch with my dad, and then rode it back to Orderville, the sleeping bag, so I'd go on that camp. It's about 15 miles each way on a trail, not a road. On the road a little bit. Most time you leave here and go down through Newts, then down by Sorensen's Ranch, over just a trail over into the muddy. Then you leave the muddy and go over into the cove, and then from the cove on down to Orderville. Then another time, this is a little farther back than that. The last time, in fact, it's the last time I saw Brownie. It was in the fall, October. When Daddy was ready to take the sheep down, and Delo and I came out with him, and we were going to drive the bucks. The bucks were in the pasture right here, and we were going to take the bucks from here to Orderville riding old Brownie. And when we got out here, it's early in the morning, we couldn't catch old Brownie. I had his nose in the nose bag, I think twice, and then he'd spook and run away. And finally about 10 o'clock, my dad came back. He'd been with the sheep, and he tried. Anyway, we couldn't catch him. He said, well, you're going to have to go without him. So about 10 o'clock, the sun was up pretty good. We started up this trail we came down, you know, through all that brush. We started up that trail driving about 30 bucks. Deloy and I would have been about 11 or 12 maybe. I don't know for sure. Deloy is 2 years younger than me. We drove him up the Bobcreek Trail, along Bobcreek Point, right by the deer camp. At the deer camp, we went down, the trail goes down into the head of Newts, down Newts, and then all the way back, same way back to Orville like we always go. And because we were delayed in leaving it, you know, we didn't get there so late. So and then we got down to going by Dave Sorensen's ranch, and after the road goes right through a field, and there's cows and a bull in there that looked really mean, and we were afraid of it. And so we didn't dare go out in the field and drive the bucks through that field. We had to go around the trees around the edge and wait till the bucks had fed clear through that field. Then we picked them up on the other side. And anyway, we were just coming out of the cove, just onto the road there, when my dad was driving back to check on us, and it was just getting dark. It took us all day. That was from here a good 15 or 16 miles straight through walking.
It'd be like Damien and James.
Walking, driving those bucks. And then, let's see, what was the other? Oh, the other. Then you go back even farther. And this was probably before I'd even ridden old Brownie by myself, where I caught him and rode him. When we were just little tiny, we were on our way up to the marking trail to mark sheep, and we had somebody help. I think Hans Sorensen was with us to help. And as we went up Earl's Canyon, we got up to the point where the trail leads to go at the marking trail, and old Brian needed water, so Daddy says, you guys take him on at the bottom, and there's a water pond up there, get him a drink, turn him around, and when you come back, he knows the trail, he'll take you up to camp. So we did that. Just finally got back to the point where they left us, and we turned up the trail. And as he turned around to start up the trail towards the marking trail, he got too close to the tree and scrubbed us both off. And we were on bareback, and he waited for us, but we couldn't get back on because we were too little. We didn't know how to get back on, and we didn't know where the trail was, where they were. So we just stood there and hollered till they came out and got us.
Which is how long?
I don't remember how long. It seemed like quite a while, but probably not very long. Are you going to turn it off? Is that what you're doing? Okay, they asked me to tell them why we call the marking trail the marking trail. It's just a trail where we bring the sheep when the lambs are little tiny, and we'd bring all the sheep into a kraal, then we'd bring them into a little pen. Then the job of we kids was to go in and find the little lambs in amongst the sheep and drag them out over to the edge where my dad would be over on the other side of the fence with his pocket knife, and he'd cut off their tails and castrate the bucks. And then he'd put a mark in the ears, and our mark was the upper half of the right ear cut out, and the upper and the lower knots on the left ear. On the ewe lambs and on the wether lambs were the opposite. And so that's how, when you're looking at them from on top, like, you can tell if it's a ewe or a wether by which side the half is. And so that's why it's a marking trail, because that's where we mark the lambs.
What's a wether?
What's a wether?
Mm-hmm.
It's a castrated buck.
Okay.
It's like a gelding horse or a steer cow.
I think I thought that must have been the dry ewes. What happened to Brownie?
Okay, old Brownie, I said we couldn't catch him, and the next spring when Daddy came up, he saw him first, and then as we came where the trail goes from Bobcreek over across the Willow and then up the Orville Gulch, it goes right around the edge of quite a deep wash there, and then it crosses, and right underneath where it went around was old Brownie. He died there, and my dad figured either two things: either he crossed in the winter when he was maybe weak, and it was like maybe it was frozen and then slick on top of something, and he slid in and couldn't climb out, or else he was going around that edge and just slid in and couldn't get out. One or the other. Anyway, that's where he died.
That's right.
Just below the little bridge we made, about 20 feet below where we put that bridge across.
The bridge right here close?
The bridge that we made, you know, where we made across. Mm-hmm.
Moran, turn around. Show Eric.
As long as they're careful, they don't step in the water.
Yeah. Yeah.
No getting wet at all. Right?
Okay. It's just a little skinny one.
You guys ready? Yeah, I'm not sure if Boyd's just gonna go. I might just take one and take Santa out.
We're on the trail between Bobcreek and the homestead now. We're on a kind of on the edge of Jimmy Creek. This is a little point when we were young. We used to call this Scenic Point. We thought it was so pretty, the view of Zion. It's about a mile or a little over a mile between the homestead and Bobcreek. This is the trail that took us to Bobcreek, the only way to go other than down the Bobcreek trail. I've walked this trail, seems like thousands of times when I was young. The thing I remember that was also difficult was after lunch we'd be camped over here to the homestead, and after lunch we'd be going back to
I hit the wrong button, go.
trying to keep up with my dad coming up this steep clay hill with the sun shining down. It's so hot. Seemed like I'd die sometimes. We're back on the Scenic Point again, and Boyd is pointing the camera towards our homestead campground. It's right at the base of that grove of trees on the hill over there. That's where we were camped at the time my dad died. I think my mother and Carol, I believe Jerry was out here, maybe Tina, I don't know. But that's where we were camped. Now he's panning to the right towards Zion Park. When he gets around a little farther, I'll show you where. He's aiming now in the area where my dad was killed, in the ledges down. You can't actually see the ledges because they drop down really deep down into the North Fork, and that's the area where he was killed.
What's this down below us, Dad, right down here?
Well, this is Jimmy Creek, and the road's all washed out right now. So we had to come around through the Inglesteads over on the other side of the gulch and come across to get into Bobcreek. This road washed out a year ago last winter. As you can see, David going along on his bike over there.
If we can.
Oh, he stopped over there now. David and Robbie were riding their bikes from Bobcreek along the road over to Homestead campsite, and we're going to walk over and just when we get through here. That's David on his bike. Robert was on ahead. We just hiked over the old trail from Bobcreek to the homestead just now, Boyd and I, and now we're at the campsite at the homestead. This is where we were camped at the time my dad was killed. In fact, each summer we spent about a month camped here during most of July. Early August we'd move back up on top, but I was just telling Boyd I think I spent 7 or 8 of my birthdays here, from probably 13 down to, I don't know, 5 or 6 probably. And we used to, right here in front of me, we used to had horny toad farms. We'd made these corrals to keep horny toads in. We had roads. We'd make little dozers out of 2 pieces of wood that we'd nail together and make roads. We had little trucks we made. We even made little string harnesses for the horny toads and had them drag little sticks like logs. And we just spent hours and hours and hours playing in this flat right here for a lot of summers. Daddy'd go out with the sheep and we'd stay here and play. Never wore shoes. I remember the Norfolk Road is down the road here about almost a mile, and we'd walk down there. And someone was talking to my dad, saying how they came out to Norfolk and saw all those little barefoot tracks in the dust in the road where we'd walk down there. I walked a lot of times from here up to Bobcreek and beyond. One of the times when Daddy left Elo and I with the sheep for 2 or 3 days, we were camped here, and the sheep were clear up past Bobcreek, past Willow Creek, past Birch, and they were over on the other side of the Orderville Gulch in those canyons, right almost across from North and South Canyon. And he had to set the alarm. We'd set the alarm for 5 o'clock, and so it just getting light. We'd get up and we'd walk clear up to there and do what he told us to do with the sheep, and then we'd walk back to here, get back here around noon and have breakfast and stay here for a little while during the heat of the day, and then we'd have to go walk back up there again to make sure the sheep got bedded in the place where he told us to put them for the next night. I think we were here for 2 days that time. Sometime before I was 13, I don't know how the year it was. One of the main activities we used to do when we were camped here is cut wood to take to town. This is actually where we were camped when Daddy cut most of the wood. And if Boyd would show us across the little flat here, those trees over there, I guess they're, what, 40 feet high? 30, 40 feet high. Those have all grown up since we used to cut wood here. That's where Daddy cut the trees. All of them along that side over there, and they've grown back to that size since that. And that would have been before 1947, so it's been 50 years, a long time ago, and they've pretty well all grown back. But every time we went to town, we had a full big load of pickup load of wood, and we went to town once a week. We've watched across the flat now, and we're over at the area where we cut so much wood. Boyd's filming one of the stumps that Daddy cut. He always believed in a sharp axe, good tools, and work hard. I think he's going to zoom back now, and the 3 or 4 trees you can see by that, it's fast, have grown up in the 50 years since he cut that stump. These trees are 30 or 40 feet high now.
You stole my seat. They have long beaks and their wings fly really fast. The little itty bitty thing.
I didn't know we were
Long.
just as well.
It stopped right here. Oh yeah, look at that. Right here.
Here at camp, normally we had 2 tents here. And one of them was right there, and one was right there, and we had a table in between them, and a stove, a little wood stove would be at the end of the table, and we had the lantern on the table. And we'd always eat, you know, it's summertime, we'd eat the last meal in the dark after we got back. We get back from the sea about dark and cook the last meal and eat it in the dark with the lantern. And in fact, this is the tent that my mother and dad were sleeping in the night before he died, when we were in the tent over there. And that's the time when I was in their tent, and they were sitting on the bed, and I was sitting on the floor in front of her, I remember. And I know we talked till after midnight about a lot of different things. And then when I got up next morning, my mother told me that Daddy had gone down to look at sheep, and he wanted me to go back up and check on some that he and I had looked at that day up on our steep trail and up there. And so I went up, and I always remember this. As I went up there, I just tried to notice every little thing, so that I could report to him and tell him what I'd seen, you know, how many sheep I saw and where they were, and then when I got back down probably at 9 o'clock in the morning or something. And then my dad would normally be back about 9 or 10, and got along towards noon, and he hadn't got back, and we got worrying, and then I don't know what time sacrament started, but anyway, eventually it was Sunday, and Mom told me I should get in the pickup and drive to town to get help. She wanted me to stop at Jack Butler's down there. I got to there, and there's nobody there, so then I drove on to Orderville, and they were in sacrament meeting. And so I got Uncle Lawrence. I can't remember how I got him from sacrament meeting, but anyway, got Uncle Lawrence out of sacrament meeting, and he and Benny Sorensen and I got in the pickup and came back out here. When I got back here, the two horses had got out of this little pasture, and they'd gone up to Bobcreek. So I went up to Bobcreek to get the horses. Uncle Lawrence went following Daddy's tracks down that way, and Benny took my mother and the other younger kids who were here, took them home. And then I came back and stayed here at the camp while they were hunting for Daddy, you know, the whole time. There's a big stack of limbs like this right out there where we'd cut wood, and they told me that if my dad did come back, I had to set those limbs on fire as a signal. And I remember later on that night, quite a while after dark, somebody brought Lynn Esplin up here, she's my friend, to be with me, and we stayed here doing that night. I remember going out after dark and looking off the hill over here, and you can see all the lights, flashlights and spotlights sneak down where the restrictions going down there.
I hadn't sure. Mother.
Brian Anderson, who was my ag teacher, he also came up here late that night, and he stayed here with Garn and I. Garn and I and Brian Anderson stayed here that night, and then the next day, probably sometime around noon, they came up and got our pickup. It was here, and I rode with them over on to, because they thought they knew about the road or something. Anyway, I rode with them over on the point, Dry Lake Point, and down as far as the road went, and waited down there. And I hadn't been there too long when Leonard Johnston and I don't know who else, I guess it was Leonard Johnston and Grant and Holgate came out, and they'd been following his tracks to the point where he fell off the ledge, and they some other people, Tiny Gardner, some others, were down below, and they had directed him to where he was. They could see something blue down there, and but they couldn't. It was so far down they couldn't even communicate back and forth. They couldn't tell from what they said whether it was him or not. So one thing Leonard asked me was what he was wearing. Was he wearing something blue? And of course he was wearing a blue Levi jacket. Anyway, then when Leonard got up to there, then Leonard and I guess it was can't remember if it was Uncle Fred or Uncle Ed now, and me got in one of their cars and went into town to tell my mother, you know, before anybody else, you know, could get there to town. What he'd done, he'd been going down around a lot of these ledges kind of sloped like this,
You know, there'll be kind of little edges above like it is up here, you know, and it drops off. He was going around like this, kind of along a little trail, and Leonard said he went, he said if he'd have gone above this bush, he'd been all right, but he went below it and slipped and grabbed the bush, an oak brush like this, and slid down and dropped off the ledge. And when they found him, he still had the oak brush in his hand, you know.
Remember what we've had of Grandpa is that picture of him that we have, and then all your stories about him.
Mm-hmm.
You got the whole or what?
One thing Uncle Arch tells about, you know, we had old Skip and Betty, and they took them down to bring him out, and Uncle Arch was with them, you know. But Uncle Arch was there where it was before they moved him or anything, and he said that he had a real pleasant expression on his face, you know.
Was he riding a horse? He was
Walking. The night before, when we came out the Saturday, I guess, that Saturday, and school was just out. No, school wasn't even out. Yeah, school was just out. He'd missed Shirley's graduation before he was out here and didn't come in. He was planning on it. He was sick and everything. But anyway, we just came out, and we were going to be with him all the time to make sure everything was all right. And when we got out here, the horses were out of the pasture then too, and they'd gone back up to Bobcreek. So he and I went up to Bobcreek. We only had one saddle, and he rode Betty bareback, and I rode Skip with the saddle. And before there's any roads anywhere, and we rode from Bobcreek down across, down around the gulch on the other side, kind of the way you went just now, because there's little bands of sheep all around. You know, they were lambing, and as they lamb, he just kind of drops them off around, and then he gathers them up later. Went down around there, so we got to North Fork Road. Then he walked around the North Fork Road on the horses, I mean, and up the road up to camp here. I always remember 2 or 3 things about that little ride. One, as we rode along, he was telling me how to sit in the saddle, you know, and to help me be a better rider and things like that.
Have you told about walking with Grandpa? He used to always tell us.
Walking especially up the hill over here where Boyd and I just came down, when he always walked really fast. He expected me to keep up.
You'd tell us that when we couldn't keep up with you on the bikes.
I can remember just walking along, hotter than this, you know, because it'd be August or something, and so tired after being out for 4 or 5 hours, and just daydreaming about a drink of cold water. Oh, I just have a drink of water.
He would stop and let you catch up, wouldn't he?
Yeah, sometimes he'd let me catch up, but then about the time I got there, we'd be on our way again. I think he purposely wanted me to be tough and strong like him. I don't know.
You're a year younger than David. Drove the pickup in.
Were you 15?
How old's Robbie?
14.
How's Robbie's age?
Oh, it's just before you turned 15.
Yeah, I was 14.
Rob's age.
What was he had the flu or sick?
He actually had pneumonia. Oh. Watch where you're stepping. There's a cord through there, you guys. And Fan Covington was the doctor, and Fan had told him he couldn't come. He said, "You need to be in bed. You can't go out." And he says, "I've got to go out." He says, "I've got sheep scattered all over. Nobody knows where they are. Nobody will be able to find them, you know." And so then they agreed that we'd come out, and if I just stayed with him all the time, and that's what the plans were. And when we got out, we went up. See, there were sheep clear all over there, and there's also sheep all the way back up here. And the night before, we had gone, after we got back to the horses, then we'd walked up that evening before. And I remember 3 different bands of ewes and lambs up here that we looked at. And when I got up next morning, he'd left instructions with Mom for me to go up and check those 3 bands, see where they were and how they're doing. You know, I did that and then came back down here.
What time of year was it?
It was May 25th.
That's about when when Joseph Smith died? Was it June?
30 years later in May when my mother died.
Oh, yeah, 30 years exactly.
30 years later than what?
30 years later, my mother died in May also.
Oh.
You know, I was thinking yesterday, Daddy bought this land in about 1932. In 1947 he died. That's 15 years. It's been 50 years since then. We have known this land longer than my dad knew it. We've known this land longer than my dad lived.
So he was how old?
42.
42.
Yeah, had 8 kids. 42 and
8?
Yeah.
Oldest was 18 and the youngest was 1. Right?
So what did you do with the sheep after that?
This Brian Anderson I said was the ag teacher. He stayed with me, and I went into town for 2 days till the funeral, and I think the evening of the funeral I came back out. And Brian Anderson and Webb Adair had been out here, kind of for those 2 or 3 days, and then I think Brian had to go back because he had to go to some school or something. So then Webb Adair and I was here for a little while we got him pretty well out of this area down here, and then Dick Esplin, my cousin Dick, and came out, and Webb went back, and Sterling Johnson, my cousin from Waukegan, came out, and the 3 of us were with them. Went through, herded back over this way and up to this marking trail where we were, and did all the marking and docking and everything, and cut off the tail and everything. And then just after that, we took him down the Bobcreek trail and out around there and out onto what they call the plains out by Cedar and to sell them. That was Dick and Uncle Lawrence came with us there. The 3 of us took him out there. And then when we got through, we rode the horses back back up to here where the picket was. And I think I turned Skip loose in Bobcreek and went to town. That ended it.
Did you sell them? Was it
Last part of May, June.
June, so about a month later?
Yeah, and it was about a month later. We had about a month, so.
You had to decide what to do with your mom.
Yeah. You know, and all those people like Webb and my cousin Dick and Sterling, they all come out and helped us, but my mother paid all of them. She made sure they all got paid for the help, for helping us. They said no, but she insisted that she pay them. Uncle Lawrence, of course, didn't want his help.
Wow.
And then that fall, your mother started as postmistress?
No, it was 2 years later.
Oh.
We had 2 years without any income. We had a little bit of insurance income, I think a couple $1,000, and we had a few sheep that we left here that didn't have lambs. We only sold the used lambs, so any used didn't have lambs. We had about 30 sheep that we put in Lynn Esplin's herd. And well, of course he had this money we kept most of the money from the sheep, just saved it. Mainly it was the insurance money, and then, we had like 5 or 6 cows at that time, or maybe 7, and we'd sell a cow every little while, and just about time I guess we were probably out of money, we'd been in a bad way, then that's when she got the job at the post office.
And she did that. How did that come up anyway?
Well,
not many jobs.
No, the Fredrick Hoyt, who was a postmaster, retired and went to St. George and
Went on a mission.
oh yeah, went on a mission, did he? And she got the job to be postmaster.
She had to pass the test.
Yeah, she had to take a test and everything, and civil service test.
Then, she passed it.
Shirley went to school that fall for the BAC. And except Lucy decided to get married, but other than that, every one of her kids went to college and eventually all graduated. And
Grandpa, how old were you when your mom died?
how old? I was about full grown by then.
Yeah, I was
45.
19.
It was in 1977.
John knew her, or had met her anyway, before she died.
I remember just before she died, not too long before she died, maybe the summer before she died, the fall, when Carl was working out at Pipe, and she came over from Orderville to see the little program, sat there on the chair half the night, because Carl was the last number of the program. It was a long program.
She was really pleased that you worked out there. That was so much fun to be out there where she was. And everybody was related, and everybody knew, you know, at least 2 generations back knew the same, well, had the same ancestors.
Yeah.
Boy, Michael, you're having a hard time with
That's kind of noisy.
You gonna make it?
So your mom stayed self-sufficient
Yeah, she did.
all the way through. So.
My mother never, ever, throughout time, never, ever had any state, federal, or church welfare. Not one penny.
Must have been pretty. I mean, she's
You guys help
she's a
out?
strong woman.
Well, yeah, we all worked, but she let us keep most of my work for school and things.
And she wasn't stingy about anything. Pretty generous all that time.
You've told us.
She always paid her tithing.
My dad always paid tithing before he died too.
You've always told us stories about doing things with your family, you know, with your mom having parties at your house.
Yeah. Yeah, our house was the place in Orderville where people would, this is a lot of this is after we were going away to school, you know. We'd come back like Thanksgiving and Christmas and things like that. Yeah. And they'd have a school dance, and at the school dance we'd spread the word that we were going to have a party at our house after, and we'd fill the house every time.
And the dance would let out till midnight, and the party would go till 2.
And my mother would always be up to give us something, have something for us to eat. She'd stay there. And you know, and I remember other times when they'd plan a big party at somebody else's place and nobody'd show up. So they'd always come to our place. They'd come to our place at an unplanned party, but they wouldn't go to a lot of the other places even if you planned it. I don't know. It's funny.
Well, I remember the old house. That was always a really fun.
That's where we had the parties. Yeah. I remember having parties there when all of our family from clear down like to, I don't know how far down, at least down to Jerry, maybe even Carol, clear up to Shirley. We'd have the friends of all of us all in the same party at our house.
And I remember you telling us that too, and we thought that was so weird. And then when we got to Cedar, we started doing that.
Yeah.
Just have to be a certain age.
Michael.
The kids were teenagers. We'd have spontaneous parties too.
That was Jay Lynn. He was a social person.
You know Larry Esplin. It's more to Cedar, don't you? Remember? Well, Lawrence's dad.
Yeah.
He was probably the oldest one that ever went to our parties.
I didn't get in on the early later ones. Then I went to parties after Dad was in the Army and other people. I'd even bring dates to them.
I remember one party we had at our place. This party happened without the Army. No, was it? No. When we had a surprise birthday party for Juanita
Oh yeah.
at our place.
Oh.
When was that?
That was my 17th birthday party.
Anyway, she was on a date with another guy, and I guess he told him, and he was supposed to bring her there, wasn't he?
And he brought
Anyway,
me
it
there.
got about time, and they weren't there.
Well, we had been there and gone again.
Anyway, Cleve Esplin and I went to try to find them to see if they, you know, were going to go back there.
That was that my last date with Marie? I think it was.
No, probably was.
So did you find them?
Yeah.